The whisper beneath the water. If you listen carefully, really carefully, you might hear it. A faint wooden creak. A soft sigh of water brushing against stone. And beneath it all, the slow heartbeat of a city that should not exist. For 15 centuries, Venice has floated between sky and sea like a strange, impossible dream. A city so delicate it seems as though one strong wave could erase it forever, and yet, it endured everything: storms, plagues, invaders, wars, earthquakes, rising seas, sinking foundations, everything nature could throw at it. But how? How did a city built on mud, algae, and water survive longer than many empires? Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, we travel to the edge of the Adriatic Sea, into the quiet, shimmering lagoon where the story of Venice began not with triumph, but with fear. And a cheat. A secret that allowed Venice not only to survive, but to defy nature itself for 1,500 astonishing years. Settle in. Breathe. And let the water take you there. The city that should have drowned. Long before Venice was a city of marble, palaces, and gondolas, it was nothing more than a swampy, mosquito-filled wilderness. The Romans knew the lagoon well, but they considered it uninhabitable, a shallow bowl of salty marshes, sandbars that shifted every season, and mudflats that seemed to swallow anything placed upon them. To a Roman engineer, Venice was an insult. To a Roman general, it was useless. To Roman farmers, it was simply a place to avoid unless you wanted wet feet or malaria. But the collapse of the Western Roman Empire began something no one expected. Because when chaos spreads across the land, the useless becomes precious. The barbarians came, and the people fled. As the 5th century dragged on, northern tribes poured into Italy: Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, Huns. Cities burned. Farmland was stolen. Roads became dangerous. It felt as if the entire world was cracking open. And so the people of the Veneto region did what no one had considered. They fled into the water. Imagine hundreds of families running not toward solid ground, but toward mud. Toward marshes. Toward the unstable islands that dotted the lagoon like little green freckles. Where others saw uselessness, they saw protection. Because the barbarians came on horses. And horses cannot swim across miles of cold, shifting lagoon. The first trick: safety through invisibility. The earliest Venetians didn't build cities. They built asterisk hiding places. Thin, stilted wooden platforms. Huts perched on poles like awkward birds. Walkways that vanished at high tide. At night, the entire settlement simply dissolved into the mist. It was not a city, yet. But it was safe. And safety is the first foundation of every civilization. The genius nobody talks about, the tree trick. Here comes the part that still fascinates engineers today. To build anything in the lagoon, the Venetians needed a foundation that wouldn't sink into mud. Concrete would crack. Stone would slide. Anything heavy would be swallowed. So they cheated. They used trees. Thousands of them. Massive piles of alder, larch, and oak, cut from distant forests, floated down rivers, and hammered vertically into the lagoon floor. Not one or two, but up to 10 million wooden piles across the city. But here's the magic. Wood that stays underwater doesn't rot. The lagoon had almost no oxygen. No oxygen meant no bacteria. No bacteria meant the wood petrified, turning hard as stone over centuries. Venice, the marble city, the city of gold, is standing on underwater forests. A floating city built on ghost trees. The science they didn't know they knew. Modern researchers discovered something else. When wooden piles are driven deep into clay and constantly washed with mineral-rich water, they absorb those minerals, slowly turning into a stone-like material. The Venetians didn't have geology degrees. But they understood one truth. If nature wants to destroy something, hide it underwater. And so tree became stone. Mud became foundation. And a swamp became a city. Venice's first real problem, the sea wanted it back. As Venice grew, a new threat emerged. Not barbarians. Not invaders. The sea. Every high tide crept further over walkways. Every storm clawed more aggressively at the flimsy islands. Every winter flood tested the city's fragile skeleton. And so the Venetians pulled off their second great cheat. They didn't just defend the lagoon. They reshaped it. The people who moved the sea. The second trick, reshaping an entire ocean. Quietly. Most civilizations defend themselves from the sea by building walls. Venice did the opposite. They changed the sea. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But slowly, patiently, almost invisibly. Because Venice understood something the rest of medieval Europe didn't. If you want to survive water, don't fight it. Guide it. Bend it. Make it think your way was its idea. And so, for centuries, the Venetians tweaked, trimmed, redirected, and sculpted the lagoon like a giant, living sculpture. They secretly diverted rivers. Rivers are both a blessing and a curse. They bring fresh water. But also silt, sand, and mud. And mud is Venice's archenemy. If too much mud settles in the lagoon, the water becomes shallow. If the water becomes shallow, ships can't pass. If ships can't pass, Venice starves. So between the 1300s and 1700s, Venetians executed one of the most ambitious environmental hacks in history. They moved rivers. Not all at once. Not with heavy machinery. But with centuries of engineering, observations, and stubbornness. They diverted the Brenta River. Then the Piave River. They built canals miles long, artificial pathways, forcing fresh water to bypass the lagoon entirely. It was like redirecting the Mississippi River, with shovels. The lagoon became their fortress. The more they studied it, the more they realized. The lagoon is the perfect shield. Too shallow for big warships. Too complicated for invaders to navigate. Too muddy for armies to march. Filled with hidden channels only locals knew. Venetian sailors memorized those channels like veins running beneath their city. A foreign ship might appear strong, but one wrong turn and it was stuck in the mud, surrounded by invisible sandbars. Venice didn't need to build walls. The water was the wall. The island strategy, spread out to survive. Medieval Europe packed cities behind stone walls. But Venice did something radical. They spread their city across 118 islands. Why? Because if a fire destroyed one island, the other survived. If a plague hit one parish, the damage stayed contained. If one island sank slightly, the others stayed level. It was the world's first anti-collapse architecture. Even today, no other city copied this approach. Because no other city could. The third trick, buildings that float without floating. When American tourists first see Venice, many think the buildings sit directly on the water. They don't. They stand on millions of timber piles, then a platform of Istrian stone, then brick walls shaped with terrifying precision. The buildings don't float. But they're designed to behave as if they could. Venetian builders made tight, narrow streets to shield against winds. They lowered ceilings to reduce weight. They curved foundations to distribute pressure. And they mastered water management like surgeons. Every drop of rain had a place to go. Every pipe had an exit. Every courtyard was a water trap. Venice wasn't built. It was engineered, century after century, problem after problem. The silent battle against sinking. Sinking wasn't a problem. Until humans made it one. For the first 1,000 years, Venice barely sank. But in the 20th century, something changed. Factories on the mainland began pumping groundwater from deep underground. The moment the water left those ancient aquifers, the land began dropping like a deflated cushion. Venice didn't sink naturally, it was human error. Between 1925 and 1970, Venice sank more than it had in the previous 1,000 years. And still, it refused to collapse. The fourth trick, predict the water before the water arrives. From the 1500s onward, Venetians kept obsessive records of tides. Scrolls. Charts. Notebooks. Thousands of pages of measurements. They tracked the moon, storms, seasonal patterns. And slowly, across generations, they built the world's oldest tide prediction system, centuries before modern meteorology. Even today, their oldest instruments still exist. Hand-carved wooden tide gauges. Bronze markers. Stone steps worn by 800 years of rising water. Venice was living with water long before climate change became a global conversation. The lagoon, their wildest invention. What most people don't know. The lagoon is not natural. Not fully. It's half nature, half human engineering, like a giant tank, constantly adjusted so the city doesn't drown or dry up. They deepened channels. Dredged mud. Built artificial sandbanks. Planted underwater seagrass to stabilize the floor. Constructed dikes, breakwaters, embankments. For over 1,000 years, Venetians treated the lagoon like a pet. Feed it. Balance it. Watch its moods. Keep it calm. Never ignore it. Even the color of the water, emerald green, didn't happen by accident. The lagoon's delicate ecosystem was curated like a work of art. And the strangest part? It worked. The plague city that refused to die. The night the bells wouldn't stop ringing. It happened in the summer of 1348. Across Europe, the air tasted wrong. The sky had a strange, metallic stillness. And in Venice, bells began to ring, slow, heavy, mournful. Not for a royal death. Not for a war. But for something far, far worse. A sickness had slipped into the lagoon. It arrived quietly, hidden in the fur of rats, tucked inside grain sacks on merchant ships. Venice, the greatest port in Europe, was now the perfect doorway for a nightmare. As gondoliers rode through misty canals, the city didn't yet realize it was about to become the world's first battleground against the Black Death. And somehow, incredibly, Venice would survive what half of Europe could not. This is how the plague arrives. The floating superhighway of death. Venice had become the Amazon prime of the medieval world. Spices from Asia. Furs from Russia. Cotton from Egypt. Gold from Africa. Silk from China. Its ships were everywhere, constantly arriving and departing. A blessing in peace. A curse during plague. By June 1348, sailors whispered about a disease sweeping the Mediterranean. By July, people began collapsing in the markets of Rialto. By August, corpses filled the narrow alleys. Modern scientists estimate 50 to 60% of Venice died. Half a city, gone in months. And yet Venice did something no other city dared to try. They organized. Not perfectly. Not calmly. But they reacted with a kind of cold, strategic intelligence no medieval government had ever shown. The first revolutionary decision: stop the ships. Imagine telling New York or Los Angeles. No more imports. No more ships. That's what Venice did. They closed the lagoon. Not all at once, but with strict controls. Ships had to anchor offshore. Crews were inspected. Cargo was left untouched for weeks. Sick passengers were removed by masked officials. And that was only the beginning. Venice invents quarantine. The word comes from here. The Venetian government realized something important. People didn't get sick immediately. There was a delay. So the city created a rule. Ships must wait 40 days before unloading. In Italian, 40 giorni. From that, the modern word quarantine was born. Venice didn't just invent the word. They invented the system. The lazarettos, islands of the damned, but also salvation. Most European cities threw plague victims into pits. Venice made a medical island system, which was centuries ahead of its time. They created two kinds of islands. 1. Lazaretto Vecchio, for the sick. 2. Lazaretto Nuovo, for the healthy who needed observation. Each island had doctors with special plague suits, disinfection yards, burning pits, storage halls for infected cargo, rooms for travelers. It was grim. It was terrifying. But it worked. Venice's plague mortality dropped dramatically with each new outbreak. The plague doctor mask was not what you think. That long-beaked mask everyone recognizes. Yes, it's real. Yes, it was used in Venice. But no, it wasn't for aesthetics or fear. The beak was packed with rosemary, lavender, cloves, mint, camphor, myrrh. The doctors believed the herbs filtered poison in the air. It didn't work. But the mask accidentally did something useful. It kept fleas, the real plague carriers, farther from their faces. A medieval invention that saved lives without understanding why. Venice learns to outsmart death. Record keeping like a modern health department. Most medieval cities kept poor records. Venice kept everything. Births. Deaths. Symptoms. Locations. Ship movements. Cargo logs. Medical notes. Because the Venetian Senate believed, if you track a danger carefully enough, you can control it. This mindset, bureaucratic, obsessive, almost scientific, allowed Venice to reduce plague deaths in later centuries while other cities still panicked. Public health before Europe knew what public health was. Venice established sanitation brigades, public inspectors, rules for food markets, rules for burial, medical licensing, slave labor restrictions, sailor health checks, nighttime patrols to stop illegal movement of sick people. This was the first true public health system in Europe. Venice wasn't fighting the plague. It was negotiating with it, buying time, predicting waves, preparing. And somehow, the city survived 7 major plagues. 7. Most cities barely survived one. A city that refused to stop living. Despite death knocking on every wooden door, Venice didn't lose itself. The markets reopened. The gondolas returned. The glassmakers of Murano began crafting again. The poets sang. The painters painted. The sailors sailed. And perhaps the most astonishing fact. During the worst plague waves, Venice built more than it abandoned. Churches, bridges, palaces, even entire neighborhoods rose from the water. Venice was sending a message. We will not die. Not now. Not ever. And the world listened. The city that could build a ship in a day. Imagine a city that floats on water. Now imagine that same city becoming the most feared maritime power in the world. No navy could match it, not France, not the Ottoman Empire, not even the mighty Spanish Armada at its peak. And Venice achieved this not through technology you would recognize today, but through ingenuity, planning, and a cheat that no other nation dared to copy, a city that was literally its own shipyard. The Arsenal of Venice. A secret city inside a city. In the heart of Venice, tucked behind walls and canals, was the arsenal. A factory. A fortress. A production line centuries ahead of the Industrial Revolution. Here's what made it extraordinary. Over 16,000 workers at its peak. Entire ships assembled in parts like giant wooden puzzles. Specialized workshops for sails, ropes, guns, and timber. A workforce so disciplined it could produce a fully equipped warship in 24 hours. Think about that. In a pre-industrial society, Venice could replace lost ships faster than enemies could sink them. It was an invisible superweapon. The city itself became a shield. The assembly line centuries ahead of its time. Venetians invented what historians today call a medieval assembly line. 1. Timber cut and seasoned. 2. Hull pieces shaped to exact specifications. 3. Mast and sail prepared separately. 4. Cannons and weaponry built on site. 5. Dock workers slid completed pieces into the canal. 6. Ship floated ready to fight. The arsenal was so massive that European diplomats described it as a city inside a city. And it wasn't just a factory, it was a national security secret. Only Venice could navigate its canals efficiently. Outsiders could not steal its methods. The Venetian navy, masters of the lagoon. Venice's geography gave it an unmatched advantage. Shallow, narrow canals that outsiders could not navigate. Hidden sandbars protecting the harbor. Fast, maneuverable galleys powered by oars and wind. Specialized vessels for warfare, trade, and reconnaissance. The navy could blockade cities, intercept pirates, and defend trade routes across the Mediterranean. Venice became the empire of commerce and war combined. Cheating the enemy. Venice also used clever tricks to survive attacks. 1. Chain barriers. Heavy chains could be raised across canals to stop invading ships. 2. Fire ships, floating platforms packed with combustible materials sent toward enemy fleets. 3. Underwater obstacles, submerged stakes and nets hidden just beneath the water. 4. Disguised lagoons, channels changed subtly each year, outsiders could get lost and stuck. No one could conquer Venice easily. It wasn't just the ships, it was the city's intimate knowledge of its own lagoon. Nature itself was on their side. The secret war of spies and masks. Venice's most unusual military strategy. While armies across Europe marched in open fields, Venice fought wars quietly. The city employed spies across rival empires. Coded messages with ciphers unknown to most Europeans. Used masquerades and social gatherings to gather intelligence. Even diplomats had secret compartments in their jackets for secret letters. During the height of its power, Venice knew what every major European ruler was planning months in advance. The masks, more than a carnival. Everyone thinks Venetian masks were just for parties. Wrong. Masks were weapons of deception. Nobles could travel disguised to spy. Merchants hid their identities to negotiate deals. Soldiers used masks to intimidate enemies or hide weaknesses. The city's obsession with control extended beyond water and ships, it extended into human perception itself. Venice's golden age of trade. With security, plague management, and naval dominance, Venice became the trade capital of Europe. Silk and spices from the east. Grain from the Balkans. Gold and silver from the Mediterranean. Glass from Murano, celebrated worldwide. Venice didn't just survive, it thrived, building palaces, churches, and theaters that still awe the world today. Its economy was a carefully orchestrated machine that turned canals into arteries of commerce. The floating city outsmarted time. For centuries, Venice didn't just float on water. It floated above the reach of disaster. Floods. Engineers adapted canals and levees. Plague. Quarantine islands saved lives. Enemy fleets. Hidden sandbars and rapid shipbuilding blocked them. Economic collapse. Trade secrets and intelligence kept wealth flowing. It was a city that cheated not just nature, but time itself. And yet, the next centuries would bring new challenges. Rising seas. Industrial change. Political decline. Modern threats Venice was not prepared for. The city that couldn't stop the water. For 15 centuries, Venice outsmarted rivers, plagues, invaders, and even the very ground beneath it. But nature has patience. The Adriatic Sea doesn't rush. It waits. And over time, it began to reclaim what Venice had borrowed. High tides became higher. Storms became stronger. And the centuries of ingenuity Venice had relied on were being tested in ways no Venetian had ever faced before. This is the story of the city's battle against its greatest enemy, the modern sea. The early struggles with floods. Acqua Alta, the high water of Venice. Venetians call it Acqua Alta *, the high water. It's a phenomenon where tides rise dramatically, sometimes flooding entire neighborhoods. Low medieval technology struggled to keep streets dry. Wooden foundations soaked longer. Saltwater corroded brick, stone, and mortar. By the 18th century, flooding was not just inconvenient, it was threatening palaces, churches, and priceless artworks. Engineering the impossible. Venice's response. Not despair. Not retreat. Instead, they adapted again, just as they had for 1,500 years. Raising walkways. Rebuilding bridges with stronger foundations. Planting mangrove-like reeds in canals to stabilize mud. Installing tide gates in key channels. Every generation had to outthink the water that had surrounded them since the city's birth. Architectural cheats that defy physics. The secret to Venice's longevity isn't just in the lagoon, it's in the buildings themselves. Bridges that float without floating. Venetians built lightweight but durable bridges across canals. Curved arches that distribute weight evenly. Stone platforms that settle naturally without cracking. Hidden timber supports beneath the water that behave like springs. Many bridges built in the 14th century still hold today. It's engineering that modern architects study, and sometimes can't replicate. Palaces on mud that shouldn't stand. Every palazzo, marble, glass, and gold, stands on piles driven deep into mud. The first layer is timber, petrified by the water. The second layer is compacted clay. Upper layers include brick and marble. Venetian architects even accounted for sinking over centuries, building walls slightly tilted to compensate. It's a cheat against gravity, mud, and time itself. The Mose Project, modern Venice strikes back. By the late 20th century, Venice's ancient methods were no longer enough. The city faced rising sea levels, stronger storms, and industrial pollution. Enter Mose, Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico. A series of movable floodgates at the lagoon's inlets. Giant barriers that rise to stop the Adriatic from spilling into the city. A system controlled by sophisticated computers, predicting tides and storms. It's Venice's 21st century cheat. Ancient engineering meets modern technology. The Mose Project can temporarily hold back the sea, buying the city precious time. But even today, scientists warn it is a temporary solution. Venice continues to float on borrowed time and ingenuity. Venice still thrives. Despite floods, tourists, and centuries of pressure from nature and humanity, Venice remains a living museum of history. A hub of trade and art. A city where every canal tells a story. A miracle that balances water, wood, and stone. And the most astonishing fact. For 1,500 years, Venice has survived not by luck, but by cheating nature again and again. It is not a city built merely on islands and mud. It is a city built on obsession, observation, and intelligence. And that is why, when you drift to sleep thinking of Venice, you realize this city was never meant to exist. And yet, against all odds, it still floats. Survival in everyday life. Venetians quickly learned that survival in their city required more than grand engineering projects or massive public health policies. It demanded a mastery of everyday life, a constant negotiation with water that could rise at any moment. They developed routines that seemed strange to outsiders. Families would build elevated platforms in their homes to keep furniture and belongings dry during floods. Streets were lined with removable wooden planks called passerelle, which could be assembled when tides rose, allowing people to walk above the water. Children learned to navigate canals in small boats almost before they could walk. Merchants timed deliveries not by hours, but by tides, understanding instinctively when a high water could make or break a business day. Even ordinary trades became intertwined with the lagoon. Fishermen harvested not only fish but algae, which stabilized canal banks. Builders worked with mud instead of fighting it, reinforcing foundations by mixing local clay with lime to create a semi-natural cement. Bakers, who once struggled to keep ovens dry in a city of floating wood, adapted by raising hearths and constructing vents to allow humidity to escape. Every profession, from glassmakers in Murano to gondoliers, became part of the city's defense against decay. Venetians developed a sixth sense for water movement. They could predict minor floods from changes in wind, cloud patterns, and even the smell of the lagoon. Elderly residents would warn younger generations, the tide speaks before it rises, and over time, the city created an oral tradition of environmental observation that supplemented official records. These practices, though invisible to outsiders, were essential for survival. Food storage was another area of ingenuity. Salt, imported from nearby salt pans, preserved fish, cheese, and meats. Grain was stored in raised silos built above flood levels, and merchants carefully tracked humidity to prevent mold. Even the simplest meal required planning to ensure that water never ruined it. Social life was also engineered for resilience. Neighborhoods were tightly knit, with families and guilds relying on one another for labor during floods or repairs. This network allowed rapid recovery from minor disasters and helped maintain public morale during crises such as epidemics or violent storms. Public squares became staging areas for communal work, planks were laid, boats prepared, and resources distributed efficiently. Venice's hidden passageways, secret doors, and interconnected canals created layers of redundancy. If a main canal flooded or a street became impassable, there was always an alternative route. Courtyards often doubled as temporary flood reservoirs, absorbing excess water before it reached the homes. Ingenious drainage systems, often disguised beneath stone, directed water back into the lagoon, reducing damage while maintaining the city's delicate equilibrium. Even religion intertwined with survival. Churches were often built on the most stable ground and became centers for both spiritual and practical guidance. Bells warned citizens not only of spiritual ceremonies but of incoming floods or dangers in the lagoon. Processions sometimes doubled as practical inspections, allowing church leaders to identify weak foundations, clogged canals, or other hazards unnoticed by civic officials. Through centuries of small, continuous adaptations, Venice survived without ever surrendering to the water. The city's greatness did not lie solely in monumental architecture or naval dominance, it existed in the sum of countless minor decisions, adjustments, and hacks implemented day after day, generation after generation. Venice, in this sense, was not just a city, it was a living organism, coexisting with its environment through constant observation, adjustment, and clever intervention. Even today, tourists walking its streets see only canals, bridges, and ornate palaces. They rarely perceive the tiny, extraordinary systems running beneath the surface, invisible but essential. Water is not merely a backdrop, it is a partner in the city's endurance. And centuries of habit, cunning, and silent engineering ensure that Venice continues to thrive where any ordinary city would have crumbled long ago. Venice under siege and the dance with time. By the late 18th century, Venice's golden age was waning. The city, once a powerhouse of trade and naval supremacy, faced challenges that could not be solved simply by moving water or raising streets. Political shifts, economic pressures, and foreign conquest tested its resilience in ways the lagoon had never demanded. Napoleon's arrival in 1797 marked the first major foreign rule. Venice surrendered without a fight, a city still afloat but no longer sovereign. The arsenal, once a symbol of maritime dominance, quieted as shipbuilding slowed. The Venetian Republic, which had lasted over 1,000 years, was dissolved. Yet even under foreign governors, the city maintained its infrastructure. Canals were repaired, bridges held firm, and residents continued to adapt to floods with the same quiet ingenuity. During Austrian rule, Venice became a backwater, largely ignored by rulers more concerned with distant borders. Some saw this neglect as a curse. The city's economy slowed, trade diminished, and many skilled artisans left. But in another sense, neglect protected Venice. The lagoon, free from industrial overdevelopment for decades, retained its balance. The city's wooden foundations continued to petrify, streets remained navigable, and centuries-old survival mechanisms persisted. By the 19th century, Venice began attracting scholars, artists, and travelers fascinated by its unique endurance. Writers and painters documented the city's canals, palaces, and daily life. Yet behind the romanticized view lay the constant battle against water. Seasonal floods became more frequent. Saltwater increasingly corroded the foundations. Old timber supports, though petrified, required ongoing care. Venice's survival now depended as much on tradition and local knowledge as it did on monumental architecture. The Industrial Revolution brought both opportunities and threats. Steamships and railways altered trade routes, reducing Venice's importance as a commercial hub. Factories on the mainland extracted groundwater, accelerating the slow sinking that modern engineers would later quantify. Yet Venetians continued to improvise. Elevated walkways were repaired, canals dredged, and public works expanded. The 20th century introduced new hazards. World War I and II brought air raids and bombing threats. Venice's unique urban fabric made it difficult to defend with modern warfare techniques, yet the city remained remarkably intact. Restoration projects after each conflict emphasized preservation while respecting centuries of ingenious water management. Flooding reached new extremes, earning the term acqua alta for especially severe events. Venice responded with both tradition and innovation. Wooden passerelle replaced in hours when streets were submerged. Churches and public buildings temporarily elevated or protected. Communication networks adapted to changing water levels. At the same time, Venice's cultural identity strengthened. Residents, artisans, and sailors maintained centuries-old skills, passing down knowledge of tides, canals, and building techniques. Even under foreign rule and economic decline, the city survived not as a relic but as a living community. Into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, modern engineering projects like the Meuse barriers became critical. Rising seas and climate change posed threats that centuries of ingenuity alone could not mitigate. Yet Venice continued to blend old and new solutions, historical knowledge of canals and foundations combined with computer-controlled floodgates, continuous monitoring of tides, and environmental restoration of the lagoon. Venice's story in this era is a testament to adaptive resilience. Even as empires changed, industrialization arrived, and climate threats grew, the city maintained its fragile equilibrium. Survival was no longer solely about clever engineering, it was about sustaining community knowledge, culture, and institutional memory. By continually balancing tradition with innovation, Venice endured. Streets, bridges, and buildings stood firm. The arsenal became a historical symbol rather than an active shipyard, and the lagoon, carefully observed and managed, remained both home and shield. Venice's survival in this period demonstrates that resilience is not only physical, it is social, cultural, and intellectual. Through conquest, decline, industrial pressure, and environmental change, Venice remained afloat. Every flood, foreign occupation, or economic downturn tested its ingenuity, yet the city persisted, a living proof that human creativity can, for centuries, cheat both nature and time. Modern threats and the battle for survival. In the 21st century, Venice faces challenges unlike any in its long history. For centuries, the city had battled barbarians, plagues, floods, and sinking foundations. But now, it must contend with climate change, mass tourism, and industrial pressures, forces that test not just architecture, but the very identity of the city. Rising seas and the threat of permanent flooding. Global warming has increased sea levels, making aqua alta events more frequent and severe. Floods that used to occur a few times a century now happen several times a year, threatening streets, churches, and historical artworks. Saltwater accelerates the decay of foundations and corrodes centuries-old masonry. Even centuries of clever engineering cannot fully prevent the water from encroaching. MOS, Venice's movable barrier system, was designed to protect the city during high tides, but it is only a temporary shield. Scientists warn that rising seas and increasingly intense storms may eventually overwhelm both ancient and modern defenses. Tourism, a double-edged sword. Millions of tourists flock to Venice every year, drawn by its canals, palaces, and romantic reputation. Tourism fuels the economy, preserving the city's cultural heritage and supporting artisans, gondoliers, and local businesses. But the influx comes with hidden costs. Large ships generate waves that erode canal walls and disturb sediment. Streets and public spaces suffer from overuse and wear. Pollution threatens the delicate lagoon ecosystem. Venice must balance economic survival with environmental preservation, a challenge as complex as any medieval engineer faced when redirecting rivers or building the arsenal. Pollution and environmental stress. The Venetian lagoon is fragile. Wastewater, industrial runoff, and boat traffic alter water quality, affecting the underwater wood and clay that support buildings. Without careful maintenance, sediment destabilizes, and the wooden piles that hold up centuries-old palaces could weaken. To combat this, Venice has implemented monitoring systems for water quality, sediment displacement, and tidal patterns, blending ancient knowledge with modern technology. Every canal, street, and building becomes part of a citywide living laboratory, constantly observed and maintained. Preservation efforts, engineering meets history. Modern engineers and conservationists face an unusual dilemma: protect Venice without destroying the historic fabric that makes it unique. Solutions include reinforcing timber foundations with modern, non-invasive techniques, installing sensors to monitor shifts in buildings, using environmentally friendly materials to repair canals and bridges, carefully regulating tourism and shipping lanes. Even the MOS barriers are part of this delicate balance, rising only during emergencies to preserve natural water flow for the lagoon. They show a continuity of Venetian philosophy: never fight water outright, guide it, and adapt. Venice as a model of resilience. Venice demonstrates lessons for the modern world. Small, continuous adaptations can outlast large, dramatic interventions. Observation, record-keeping, and local knowledge are crucial for survival. A society's culture, social networks, and traditions are as important as physical infrastructure. In essence, Venice is a city built not only on wood, stone, and mud, but on centuries of accumulated human intelligence, applied to survive one of the harshest natural environments in Europe. The continuing story. Even today, Venetians use centuries-old strategies in tandem with modern engineering to cheat nature once more. Floating foundations, canals that act as drainage, elevated walkways, and Moe's gates represent continuity with past generations' ingenuity. Venice survives by embracing change while respecting tradition. Each flood, storm, or threat becomes an opportunity to innovate. And despite modern pressures, the city continues to function, not as a museum, but as a living, breathing testament to human persistence. Hidden marvels and secrets of Venice. Venice is famous for its grand palaces, glittering piazzas, and winding canals, but its survival depends on countless hidden marvels, secrets woven into the very fabric of the city. Behind every ornate facade and along every narrow canal, Venetians engineered systems that few outsiders ever notice, yet these invisible tricks have kept the city alive for over 15 centuries. The secret waterways. While tourists drift along the Grand Canal, most do not realize that Venice has hundreds of hidden canals serving vital purposes. Some act as flood relief channels, diverting excess water away from public areas. Others connect directly to underwater foundations, allowing maintenance teams to monitor and stabilize timber piles. A few are dead-end channels that absorb water surges during aqua alta, functioning as emergency reservoirs. These secret arteries are as important to Venice as the bridges above, silently performing the work that keeps the city from drowning. Hidden doors and escape routes. Many Venetian palaces and public buildings contain hidden doors, tunnels, and passageways. Originally designed for merchants and nobility to move discreetly, these routes also doubled as survival mechanisms during floods, fires, or attacks. Some buildings have interior doors that open directly into secondary canals, allowing residents to escape rising waters. Secret staircases connect rooftops, courtyards, and adjacent buildings, distributing foot traffic during emergencies. Certain alleys, invisible to outsiders, create alternative routes to safety, ensuring the city can function even when main streets are submerged. These concealed architectural features reflect a centuries-old mindset: every structure must serve both beauty and survival. Venetian engineering tricks. Beyond visible canals and bridges, Venice contains subtle engineering hacks embedded in walls, foundations, and streets. Foundations are often built slightly tilted to compensate for gradual settling, allowing palaces to remain upright for centuries. Bricks and stones are laid in interlocking patterns that absorb movement from tides and flooding, preventing cracks. Wooden piles, buried deep beneath clay and silt, petrify underwater while still acting like living springs, flexing with changes in water pressure. Bridges are built with hidden arches and drainage channels that distribute weight and water, ensuring longevity. Modern engineers study these ancient methods to understand how the city has endured forces that would destroy most other settlements. The art of controlled water. Venice is not simply surrounded by water, it is intertwined with it. The lagoon functions as a living system that the city continuously manages. Planting seagrass to stabilize sediments and reduce erosion. Constructing sandbanks to control tidal flows. Dredging and reshaping channels to guide water through safe routes. Designing public squares and courtyards to act as temporary water storage during floods. The city's very layout is a product of centuries of adaptation, balancing beauty with utility, commerce with survival. Cultural survival as a form of engineering. Venice's survival is not purely physical. Cultural strategies are equally important. Guilds and family networks maintain artisanal knowledge, ensuring skills like glassmaking, boat building, and masonry persist. Neighborhood cooperatives organize flood response and emergency repairs. Traditions, festivals, and communal practices reinforce social cohesion, providing resilience against disaster. By embedding survival into daily life and culture, Venetians created a city that is adaptive on every level: architectural, social, and environmental. Venice, a masterclass in human ingenuity. When combined, these hidden systems reveal a remarkable truth: Venice survives not because it is invincible, but because it anticipates, adapts, and continuously cheats nature. Every bridge, canal, doorway, and foundation is part of a centuries-long experiment in resilience. Every flood, tide, or storm is met with a combination of engineering, tradition, and social intelligence. Venice remains a living city precisely because it has never relied on luck alone. The city's beauty, grandeur, and mystery are inseparable from these hidden survival mechanisms, making Venice both a masterpiece of human creativity and a monument to persistent adaptation. Venice in the modern era. In the 21st century, Venice remains one of the most extraordinary cities on earth, yet it faces pressures unlike any in its long history. Rising seas, climate change, tourism, and environmental degradation have combined to create challenges that even the most ingenious Venetians could not fully anticipate. And yet, the city continues to survive, an ongoing testament to adaptation, resilience, and human ingenuity. Climate change and rising waters. Global warming has increased the frequency and severity of acqua alta events. Streets that were once only occasionally flooded now see high water multiple times a year. Historic palaces and churches are at risk, and saltwater continues to threaten centuries-old foundations. To respond, Venice has embraced both ancient and modern techniques. Monitoring tides using sensors and predictive modeling. Maintaining elevated walkways in flood-prone areas. Protecting historic buildings with temporary barriers. Strengthening foundations using a combination of modern materials and traditional wooden pile techniques. Even with these measures, scientists warn that Venice remains vulnerable. The city's survival now depends on continual observation and intervention, echoing the vigilance of past generations. Tourism, sustaining and straining the city. Tourism is Venice's lifeblood. Millions of visitors contribute to the local economy, funding restoration projects, supporting artisans, and preserving cultural heritage. But the sheer volume of visitors has environmental and structural impacts. Large cruise ships create waves that erode canal walls and stir up sediment. Constant foot traffic accelerates wear on streets and bridges. Pollution from boats and human activity threatens the delicate ecosystem of the lagoon. Venice must carefully manage tourism to maintain both its economy and its fragile environment. Policies limiting cruise ships, controlling tourist movement, and promoting sustainable visitation are increasingly important. MOS, the modern barrier. The MOS project, Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico, represents the city's most ambitious modern defense. Movable gates at the lagoon inlets rise to prevent flooding during exceptionally high tides. The system allows normal water flow during regular tides to protect the lagoon ecosystem. MOS represents the continuation of Venice's centuries-old strategy, not to fight nature directly, but to guide and manage it. While Mose is a technological marvel, it is not a permanent solution. Rising sea levels and climate change require ongoing adaptation, just as they did in centuries past. Environmental preservation. Venice's survival also depends on the health of the lagoon. Replanting seagrass stabilizes sediments and reduces erosion. Monitoring water quality prevents degradation of wooden foundations. Managing industrial runoff protects both architecture and the aquatic ecosystem. In this way, Venice continues the tradition of centuries of careful observation and intervention, blending human ingenuity with natural processes. Cultural continuity and social resilience. Modern Venetians maintain the city's survival not just through engineering, but through culture. Artisans preserve centuries-old skills in glassmaking, carpentry, and masonry. Community networks organize maintenance, emergency response, and restoration. Festivals and traditions reinforce social cohesion, ensuring knowledge is passed to new generations. The city's cultural intelligence complements its physical structures, ensuring Venice remains a living, functioning city rather than a static museum. Venice today, a living experiment. Venice continues to cheat nature, not through a single grand solution, but through continuous adaptation. Water management combines medieval techniques with modern engineering. Buildings, streets, and canals are continuously maintained and monitored. The city balances economic activity, tourism, and environmental preservation. Social networks and traditions provide resilience alongside technology. Venice demonstrates that survival is not just about architecture or engineering, it is about the constant integration of observation, adaptation, and cultural knowledge. Even in an era of global climate change, Venice endures. It remains a city built on mud, wood, and water, yet thriving for 1,500 years through ingenuity, foresight, and the remarkable ability of humans to bend nature to their will. After 1,500 years of floods, plagues, invasions, political upheaval, and rising seas, Venice still stands. Its streets, bridges, and canals are not just remnants of history, they are living proof of human ingenuity, adaptation, and resilience. From diverting rivers and sculpting the lagoon, to inventing quarantine, building floating foundations, secret waterways, hidden doors, and the world's first assembly line shipyard, Venice survived through observation, clever engineering, and cultural intelligence. Even today, with climate change, mass tourism, and modern environmental threats, Venice continues to thrive, carefully balancing tradition and innovation, nature and human will. Every high tide, every gust of wind, every challenge becomes part of the city's ongoing experiment in survival. Venice is more than a city. It is a masterclass in cheating nature. And its story is far from over.